For over 100 years, people said no one would ever see the bottom of Lake Tahoe. Too deep, too cold, too dark. According to reports, that finally changed on a quiet September morning in 2025, when a small robotic vehicle was lowered into the water, and for the first time in recorded history, cameras illuminated the true floor of one of America's deepest lakes. I want to be upfront about something before going further. The specific expedition details circulating about this dive, the exact organization behind it, the individuals involved, and the precise footage captured are difficult for me to independently verify with full confidence. So I'll frame those specifics carefully rather than stating them as flatly settled fact. What I can tell you with complete confidence is the real, well-documented history of Lake Tahoe itself, the genuine science behind why its depths have remained essentially unseen for so long, and the real folklore that's grown up around that unexplored darkness over the past century, because that part of the story doesn't need any embellishment to be genuinely fascinating. Lake Tahoe sits high in the Sierra Nevada mountains, straddling the border between California and Nevada at an elevation of just over 6,200 feet. It's enormous, roughly 22 miles long and 12 miles wide, holding such an enormous volume of water that if you drained the entire lake and spread that water evenly across the whole state of California, it would cover the ground more than a foot deep. But the sheer surface size isn't actually what makes Tahoe so unusual. It's the depth. At its deepest point, Lake Tahoe plunges to roughly 1,645 feet below the surface, making it the second deepest lake in the entire United States, behind only Crater Lake in Oregon, and one of the deepest lakes anywhere in the world. Because of its much larger overall size compared to Crater Lake, Tahoe actually holds a considerably greater total volume of water, making it genuinely exceptional even among the world's deepest lakes. That extreme depth, combined with the lake's remarkable clarity, is exactly what turned Tahoe into a magnet for mystery and legend for well over a century. On a calm, clear day, it's possible to look down into Tahoe's water and see objects sitting many dozens of feet below the surface, a level of transparency that genuinely rivals some of the clearest ocean water found anywhere on the planet. That combination created a strange, persistent contradiction that shaped generations of local folklore. A lake so clear you can practically see through it near the surface, hiding a floor that, till very recently, no human being had ever actually laid eyes on. Lake Tahoe's basin was formed roughly 2 million years ago, through a combination of geological faulting and glacial activity that carved out the deep basin the lake now fills. Unlike many smaller alpine lakes, shaped mostly by surface glaciers scraping across bedrock, Tahoe's basin was produced by much larger, sustained tectonic forces, a slow geological process that created a lakebed considerably deeper and more dramatic than its calm, postcard-perfect surface would ever suggest to an ordinary visitor. Scientists studying the lake's hydrology estimate that water entering Tahoe has an average residence time of several hundred years, meaning a single drop of water entering the lake today could still be sitting somewhere within its basin, centuries from now, slowly cycling through one of the stillest, most undisturbed environments found anywhere in North America. The combination of extreme age, extreme depth, and extreme stillness is exactly the kind of environment that breeds enduring legend, and Lake Tahoe has genuinely accumulated several, each worth understanding on its own terms. The most well-known is the story of Tahoe Tessie, a supposed lake monster said to lurk somewhere in the deep water, occasionally reported by boaters and swimmers as a dark, serpentine shape moving just beneath the surface. Tessie has genuinely deep roots in the region's folklore, tracing back to stories among the Washoe people, whose traditional homeland includes the Tahoe Basin, describing something living in the lake's depths long before the area became a major tourist destination. Over the following decades, the legend was absorbed thoroughly into modern regional pop culture, turned into a mascot, printed on souvenirs, painted on murals around Tahoe City, and passed down through generations of campers telling stories around the fire. No verified physical evidence of Tessie has ever surfaced, but the counter-argument has always carried real weight too. Nobody could definitively rule it out either, because until very recently, nobody had ever actually gone down and thoroughly examined the lake's true depths to check. A second, considerably darker piece of Tahoe folklore involves persistent rumors about the lake's cold water preserving bodies. The underlying claim is that Tahoe's frigid, near-constant deep water temperature and minimal water movement at depth slow decomposition dramatically, meaning a body sunk decades ago could theoretically remain remarkably intact today, resting undisturbed in the cold and the dark. This particular legend isn't purely invented out of nothing. It's genuinely true that cold water slows decomposition significantly compared to warmer environments, a well-established fact in forensic science, and there have been real documented cases over the years of drowning victims recovered from Tahoe in a notably preserved state, sometimes years after they initially went missing. Those isolated, genuine cases were enough to fuel decades of much broader, considerably more speculative rumors, including persistent stories connecting the lake to organized crime activity in the region during the 20th century, suggesting numerous undiscovered bodies might be resting somewhere on the lake floor. It's worth being precise here. The underlying preservation phenomenon is real and scientifically explainable, while the broader claims about extensive undiscovered remains scattered across the lake bed remain unverified speculation rather than documented fact. The third major piece of Tahoe legend is, in some ways, the most interesting because it's a genuinely well-documented case study in how a story can become accepted as fact purely through repetition, without ever actually being true. For years, a persistent rumor circulated claiming that the legendary French oceanographer Jacques Cousteau had piloted a submersible into the depths of Lake Tahoe at some point during the 20th century and returned to the surface so visibly shaken by what he'd witnessed that he refused to publicly discuss it, supposedly remarking that the world wasn't ready for what rested down there. That quote, repeated by tour guides, printed across countless blog posts, and shared endlessly online for years, became one of the most widely repeated pieces of Tahoe folklore in existence. It also appears, based on the research of people who've actually tried to track down its origin, to be entirely false. There's no verified historical record of Cousteau ever conducting a dive expedition in Lake Tahoe, no documented interview containing anything resembling that quote, and no credible primary source connecting him to the lake at all. It appears to be a genuine urban legend, one that simply grew large and was repeated often enough, across enough different retellings, that it eventually calcified into something many people now accept as established fact. A pattern that shows up again and again whenever a story is compelling enough and a place is mysterious enough to invite that kind of embellishment. For more than a century, these three stories, the monster, the hidden bodies, and Cousteau's supposed warning, filled a vacuum created by a genuinely uncomfortable scientific reality. Nobody had the technology, or frankly, the strong enough motivation, to actually go check what was really down there. Human divers simply cannot survive anywhere close to Tahoe's deepest sections. Recreational scuba diving typically becomes seriously risky beyond roughly 130 feet. Technical and commercial divers using specialized gas mixtures can occasionally push past 300 or even 400 feet under carefully controlled circumstances, but even that barely scratches the surface of what Tahoe actually hides. At 1,600 feet down, water pressure reaches roughly 50 times what you'd experience at sea level. Temperature drops to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit and stays there consistently, year-round, cold enough to cause fatal hypothermia in an unprotected diver well before pressure became the primary danger. No sunlight reaches that depth at all. It's permanent, total darkness. An environment genuinely as alien to ordinary human experience as the deep ocean floor, sitting quietly beneath one of the most visited, most photographed lakes in the entire country. Prior efforts to understand Tahoe's true depths were mostly limited to sonar mapping, a technology capable of measuring the general shape and contour of the lake bed, showing researchers how deep the water was and how the underlying terrain sloped or flattened in different areas. What sonar fundamentally couldn't provide was any visual information, texture, color, movement, or the actual presence of specific objects resting on the bottom, the kind of direct visual documentation only a camera can capture. Despite generations of interest and mapping effort, the true visual floor of Lake Tahoe, what it actually looked like, remained genuinely unknown, making it one of the last substantially unexplored places within reach of the continental United States, hiding in plain sight beneath one of the most recognizable lakes in America. According to reports that finally changed through the efforts of a small nonprofit organization, using a custom-built, remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV, a category of underwater robot commonly used in oceanography and offshore research work, though rarely built from scratch by a small, grant-funded grassroots team, rather than a major research institution or corporation. Reports describe roughly 2 years of design, engineering, and testing work going into building a vehicle capable of withstanding the crushing pressure and total darkness of Tahoe's deepest sections, equipped with powerful lighting arrays designed to illuminate a lakebed that had genuinely never been lit by anything other than a sonar pulse, along with high-resolution video capability intended to finally provide the visual record that decades of sonar mapping alone couldn't offer. According to these same reports, the actual dive took place in early September 2025. With the vehicle lowered from a support boat positioned over one of the deepest, most promising sections of the lake basin, based on years of accumulated sonar data. As the vehicle descended, it reportedly passed through the sunlit blue water. Similarly, according to these reports, no bodies, remains, or debris resembling the darker Mafia-era folklore were found at this specific location either. That doesn't erase the genuine documented cases of preserved remains recovered from Tahoe over the years, a real phenomenon scientists confirm is possible, given the lake's frigid temperatures, and in some areas, minimal water movement. But it would represent at least one small, honest data point pushing back against the much larger, more sensational rumor of a lakebed extensively littered with undiscovered crime victims. And regarding the Cousteau legend specifically, this particular story never actually needed a modern expedition to debunk it in the first place. The claim was already unsupported by any verifiable historical record, well before any recent dive took place. Exactly the kind of case where careful research into primary sources matters more than any single piece of new footage, however dramatic. Beyond simply testing decades of folklore, if these reports are accurate, work like this would carry genuine, meaningful scientific value for understanding and protecting Lake Tahoe going forward. Tahoe's exceptional clarity, the same trait that made its hidden depths so tantalizing to generations of storytellers in the first place, has genuinely been declining over recent decades due to documented factors including nutrient runoff, sediment pollution, and development pressure around the lake's shoreline, a real, well-documented environmental concern actively studied by researchers at institutions including the University of California, Davis's Tahoe Environmental Research Center, and the University of Nevada, Reno. Understanding exactly how sediment settles and behaves at the very bottom of the lake genuinely does give researchers a more complete picture of the broader forces shaping Tahoe's ecological health. Information valuable for long-term conservation efforts, regardless of what specific footage any single dive happens to capture. What makes a story like this genuinely resonate, beyond whatever specific footage does or doesn't confirm, isn't really about monsters or hidden crime scenes. It's about the simple, powerful pull of a genuinely unanswered question sitting in plain sight for over a century, visible from the surface as one of the most photographed, most beloved lakes in the country, yet almost completely unknown just a few hundred feet beneath that famous sunlit blue water. That contrast, overwhelming familiarity on the surface paired with total unfamiliarity in the depths, is genuinely rare, and it's exactly the kind of mystery that naturally resists easy dismissal, regardless of how mundane or how remarkable whatever's actually down there eventually turns out to be. It's also worth remembering just how small a fraction of Tahoe's true depths has actually been documented, even accounting for reported recent efforts. A single dive, however successful, covering even several hundred meters of lakebed, represents a genuinely tiny sliver of a basin stretching across dozens of square miles, filled with underwater canyons, ridges, and features that sonar mapping alone has only partially revealed. Whatever the true, complete picture of Lake Tahoe's floor eventually turns out to be, it's very likely still being assembled one careful, patient expedition at a time, rather than settled definitively by any single dive, however historic that first successful descent might genuinely be. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be terrifying to be extraordinary. Sometimes it's enough to simply, finally be known, after 100 years of nothing but rumor, speculation, and a stillness deep enough to hold almost any story people were willing to tell about it. If you're drawn to stories where the real, carefully verified answer turns out to be more genuinely interesting than the legend that grew up around the unknown, subscribe, because Lake Tahoe's true depths, however much of them have actually been seen so far, still have plenty of quiet left to explore.